But let's bring in now Bridget McKenzie from the National. Senator McKenzie, great to see you as always. Let's get your take on, was this, this is obviously a loss for the Libs last night, but there was a swing towards the Liberal Party. So how did you read it? What's your take out?
Yeah, I think your analysis, both James and Rita, very, very on point. I spent a bit of time in Dunkley. It is a unique seat, but it really is that aspirational, low to middle income community that just wants to get ahead, loves its country, loves its family, and they work really hard. And Albanese isn't actually delivering for them on a raft of fronts, and I think they need to understand more and more that that is the actual fact. But it was a really strong result yesterday for Peter Dutton and Nathan Conroy, I thought. If you think about within 2 years, we've basically flipped nearly 10% if you compare it to the Aston by-election. And that is because the trend of the Australian voters in these types of seats is that they don't see the Labor Party as being on their side, whether it's inflation, cost of living, energy policy, or indeed, the big new car tax that's coming their way.
Yeah.
So I think it was a really positive, taking it from a safe Labor seat and within 18 months making it a marginal seat is quite historic. The average swing for a first-term government is 1.7%. So we're really pleased with the result, and it's a great foundation to head into the general election next year.
Bridget, tell us, though, does the Liberal Party, you talk about this as an aspirational seat, but the Labor government under Albanese has really attacked small business aspiration through regulation, through IR law changes, all of these sorts of things, a tax code that punishes the accumulation of capital and wealth. Does the coalition need to do more to not just rely on discontent, but also to become, again, much more explicitly the coalition, the party of aspiration, and making that, a really positive thing that people can get behind and want to get on board with?
Yeah, James, I think you're dead right. I think what you've seen under Peter Dutton and David Littleproud in terms of the leadership of the coalition is a back-to-basics approach. And I think that's working. Australians are doing it tough, and they need to see, have the government's failures obviously exposed, which is part of our job. But the other part of our job is to have some really practical, tangible ways that we're going to assist with that. And getting back to basics, I think, as a centre-right political movement is our first step. And so we've been making those sorts of decisions. You've seen us come out on the family car tax very, very strongly, and a raft of other measures on calling out Labor's failure to get their spending under control and the flow and impact that has on keeping inflation high and therefore interest rates. But we need to have that conversation louder, more strongly, more consistently, and at a grassroots level in communities around the country.
Rita.
I wonder, Bridget, if there should have been more made about the cultural issues during this election. You had a candidate there from Labor who essentially called the majority of her electorate as suffering from the worst example
of just incredible
white privilege. 56% voted no in the referendum, and she said to her that was a worst example of white privilege, and she railed against that. Now, I didn't hear much from the Liberals. It was something like you don't want to veer into that direction. But I think people care about these cultural issues. These are substantive issues. They're not things, I don't know, sometimes I feel like the Liberals treat them like trivial afterthoughts, not worthy of a debate.
Point, Bridget.
No. Yeah, no, they define. I think the cultural issues actually define our societies, and the Dunkley community were very, very significantly no. And I mentioned at every interview I did about Dunkley, about the white privilege comment, because let's think about this community being represented by a very popular community member in Peter Murphy who, died in tragic circumstances. They now have a local MP who thinks they're all elitists. Now, let's get that local MP meeting as many of her constituents as possible over the next 18 months so they can actually see that she's no Peter Murphy and in fact has Bridget, a level of derision
Yep, I'm going to jump in there, Bridget.
A level of derision to her community.
No, she's an extremely charismatic individual, and I want to play you a clip which shows her personality, her charisma, the impact, the dynamic impact she is going to have on the Australian Parliament, and watch even Albo shudder in the corner as she's speaking. Take it away, new member for Dunkley.
Rowan.
Peta was a strong, wise and confident woman that represented our community. She delivered for Dunkley, and I ask the people of Dunkley to vote for me because I too will deliver for Dunkley. I will be a strong, local, confident representative for the people of this great community.
Little shudder there from Albo. I'm not sure she's exactly going to set the place on fire. Maybe I'm being unfair, Bridget. But tell us what you think, seriously, what you think that she will bring to the Parliament that, Albo and the Labor Party can go, thank God we got her over the line.
Well, I've been focused on Nathan Conroy, and what I think the people of Dunkley wanted was their Frankster Baxter rail upgrade, for instance. That's the type of thing they want delivered. The Labor Party really didn't put on the table any great promises in this campaign to be delivered. In fact, they've restricted funding to the 2 local councils within Dunkley. They haven't had a major project being funded in the last 2 years. So she's got a big hill to climb if she's going to actually deliver for Dunkley before the next federal election. And I think Albo and his incompetent ministry will be not helping her fulfil that promise she just made on that clip.
James.
But now let's sort of throw things a bit forward here. We've got a budget coming up here. I would expect there's going to be an awful lot of money thrown around. There's going to be very little in the way of spending restraint in terms of what's coming down the road. This is all going to be setting up, obviously, for an election probably next year, but possibly later this year. How concerned and what is the coalition going to be doing to counter this sort of wave of money and saying, oh, well, we're going to make this cheaper and that cheaper by taking it out of this pocket and putting it into that pocket and clipping the ticket along the way?
Well, it's a really good question, James, and I think Australians need to be cognizant that the excessive spending by this government, I think it's, in excess of, $200 billion additional spending over the forward since they've come to power, is actually making getting inflation under control harder. And you see that in the figures. And Michelle Bullock is not going to put downward pressure on the interest rates, which is the thing that's really killing the suburbs out there, until she can see some restraint from these guys, let alone the productivity drag. So every decision they're making is making getting inflation and therefore interest rates harder. We need to unpack that very complicated relationship much more simply and clearly for the Australian public so that the fault of that high mortgages and the fault of high grocery prices and energy prices is sitting squarely at the feet of the Labor Party and not the Ukraine war, which they're still trotting out as one of, the reasons why Australians are struggling. I mean, get a grip. So that is our task. And I think those who are, the economists in our community, independent and otherwise, need to be really prosecuting that going forward because these guys aren't putting any discipline into their budget. They are going to go on a spending spree. And when you're a family that is struggling to pay the bills, struggling to keep a hold of your house, keep your kids in school, etc., any relief is going to be welcomed. And that's sort of the reality and the perverse, I think, tension that's going on. So that they're going to get that short-term relief, but it will keep the fundamental economic situation in place for longer, hurting more people for longer.
Now, Bridget, we had the news during the week from the head of ASIO that there was a character within one of the political parties, a politician who'd shall remain nameless, who'd been betraying this nation or dealing with foreign nations, and there was talk of family of a Prime Minister being involved and all sorts of things, all sorts of, spy drama, skullduggery. So what's your take? Who is the mystery spy, Bridget McKenzie?
Well, you'll have to, try a lot harder to get that out of
Nothing
me.
like
No,
putting
I
you on the
don't
spot.
know. But I do think, irrespective of which side of politics this person comes from, the name should be public, because otherwise all former MPs are subject to suspicion. And I appreciate that, no charges can be laid because there's no ongoing investigation. But all of us need to be aware that foreign operatives exist, they target us, and we can't be naive to that.
Well, why can't there be charges? We're talking about treason here. If we're a serious country, there would be charges forthcoming. But you've got something none of us have access to, which is parliamentary privilege. If you find out the name, will you get up in Parliament and say, this is the traitor who was amongst us?
Yeah, well, I think it is beholden on Claire O'Neill as the Minister to absolutely use parliamentary privilege in a responsible way, with integrity, and name this person. They sought to betray our country. They do not deserve to be protected in any way by the political class. It's not Burgess's job. He's a man of high integrity, and in frustration in his, statement around intelligence matters, made this known, that this was a fact. It is then beholden on the government to name that person so that you can take the associated guilt off those not operating with foreign operatives, but also highlight how serious this is.
James?
But Bridget,
it's not trivial.
It's absolutely not trivial. It's really, really, really serious. It doesn't get much more serious than this. But this is the real problem. The fact that, when you and other people say that it will take the shade off of other people who are ex-parliamentarians or other parliamentarians. The fact that I think everybody in the media and political class has been over the last 72 hours playing this party game of, who could it be? And the fact that there are so many potential people that people are thinking about, does that indicate that we actually have a much bigger problem than just this one particular person, that this foreign influence, that there are so many people who are under that shade, suggests that we have a real serious problem.
Yep.
Well, that's why it's so important, James, that the name is released. And then it actually becomes clear. I just don't know what the government's got to hide on this. It's not a trivial matter, as we all recognise. There is no need to protect this person, because they weren't thinking of protecting any of us or our country or our future, so they don't deserve protection. I just don't know why the name won't be released and the speculation can end, and this person will have to then deal with the consequences of their own behaviour.
Well, maybe we should do charades. Sounds like 2 syllables, ends with whatever, rhymes with. We could have a lot of fun. Bridget McKenzie, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders this morning.